with me. My name is Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditties. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys. Miss Liz in the house. That's right, Miss Liz is here. And today we have Dr. Avrum Weiss in the house. And we're going to talk about his book, The Hidden Truth, Hidden in Plain Sight, Men Fear of Women. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his tea as well. We're going to talk about colors. We're going to talk all that good stuff. But before we get started, we're going to get you guys over to Miss Liz's YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those good platforms. Give it a quick subscribe, follow, and share, because all these tea times do make a difference. One tea makes a difference with someone's life, no matter where you are, in what country, community, family members. This is what these tea times are. We serve not the beverage, but we serve real life stories and real life difference. So let's get started with the disclaimer and then a nice, beautiful intro, and we'll get Dr. Avrum in here and we'll talk about his incredible book. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicated to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I'm Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own judgment when considering any action or decisions that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of this discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email, bookingmissliz@gmail.com, or check out my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate and comment on or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect those wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Now, let me give you a little bit on my guest. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where every cup poured brings a new story, a new truth, and a new seed of change. Today, I'm honored to sit with Dr. Avrum Weiss, a psychologist, author, and pioneer in exploring the inner world of men's emotions. His groundbreaking book, Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships, has opened virtual conversations about vulnerability, fear, and love. Together, we'll explore how unseen emotions and unspoken fears shape connection, communication, and intimacy, not just between men and women, but within the human heart itself. So brew your tea, open your hearts, and join us as we dive deep into understanding what lies beneath the surface, where silence becomes insight and compassion becomes healing. Let me get Dr. Avrum in here and let's spill some tea together. Welcome to Dr. Avrum.
Hi.
It is a pleasure to have you here. Well, Dr. Avrum, I'm going to take you down a little rabbit hole first, and then we're going to get into the book and get into your tea. Who was Dr. Avrum as a little guy, and who is Dr. Avrum now?
Let me just give you the pronunciation. My name's pronounced Avrum.
Avrum.
Who was I as a little guy? I think like most people, like most men, I had two very, very close friends, and other than that, felt pretty lonely and sort of clueless about other people seeming to have figured out when I was having a hard time figuring it out.
And who are you now?
I am now a semi-retired, very happy person. I made a big move in my life a number of years ago. I moved to Maine, and I spend a lot of my time outside doing things I enjoy doing. And most of my professional work is doing things like this, teaching other therapists, speaking to large groups, mostly things I enjoy.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that today when you're speaking and book and that. Let's get into the book. The first question that came in for you was, what first inspired you to explore men's inner fears of women and turn that insight into your book, Hidden in Plain Sight?
Well, there was a period in my practice when I was working primarily with men, and as I was sitting them, most of what they were talking with me about were the things they weren't happy about in their relationships. And I asked a question that any therapist would ask, which is, have you talked with your girlfriend, wife, partner about this? And I was really surprised that the answer was pretty consistently the same. Most of the time, men would look at me like I had just asked the stupidest question in the world. And why didn't I understand that? Of course, they haven't talked to their partner about this. And as I went on, it slowly started to occur to me, why are they not, if they're so unhappy, why are they not talking to the person who might be able to help them with that? And I thought, it kind of sounds, it was kind of a crazy idea, but I said, it sounds like they're scared to talk to her. And so then I started broaching that idea with men. And again, the response was this almost exactly the same each time. First, they would get defensive and kind of bow up and be mad at me that I suggested they were scared of a woman. But literally within 60 seconds, kind of a look would come over their face and they'd be like, well, that's a really interesting idea. That would kind of explain a lot. And then we would go back through a lot of the territory we had already covered, only it started to make sense now. With that lens, looking through that lens, a lot of things that hadn't made sense started to make a lot more sense.
Well, I had a lot of listeners reach out to me, and they were like, Miss Liz, like, that's a tough topic there, fear of women. Like you said, like the first thing people do is go on defense, right? I'm not scared of my woman. Like, so how did you get the title of that book, Hidden in Plain Sight?
Well, let me just comment about what you just said, because what I talked about is men's reaction, and women's reaction has been very different. Women's reaction has been basically to be pretty certain that I've lost my mind. And that's not possible. That it's not possible that men are afraid of women, because what they're looking at is they're looking at the outside world, and they're looking at the patriarchy, and they're looking at men's privilege and men's power, and they're saying, what in the world would men have to be afraid of? There's no way in the world. And so women are a harder sell. Although I have to say that, interestingly, in my writing on psychology today, it's slightly more women than men who read my articles. So I think it's difficult for women to sort of believe, but then they get pretty intrigued and interested in it.
Wow, that's interesting to hear that more women are reading about this.
Yeah. Surprised me. I would also say I've done workshops. I did one workshop in particular where we had a 3-day workshop. And then 4 months later, we had another 3 days. And so there were 4 months for people to go back and sort of take the ideas and see what they could make of them in their relationship. It's actually the women who made more changes in their relationship over that 4 months than it was the men. Because for women, it's really critical. Women have often spent much of their relationships being pretty frustrated and sometimes quite angry at their partners for a variety of issues, but mostly they have to do with not feeling like they're making the connection with their male partners that they want to. And then it's very easy to interpret that as sort of willful withdrawal on the part of men. Well, we're not close because he's not interested in being close with me. And so the idea that it's not willful, that it's based on fear, is really sort of it can be really a game changer for women.
Well, and it's kind of like your title of your book, Hidden in Plain Sight, right? It's right in front of us.
Yeah. Well, that was your other question. And that's why I called it that, because it's one of those ideas. And I think you'll probably have experienced this yourself in the time from when we booked to now. Once you get that idea in your head, then you see it everywhere. You can't help but see it once you understand it. So it really is hidden in plain sight. It's always been there. It always is there. I have yet to meet a heterosexual man who would not say he's afraid of women. I mean,
Wow.
It's pretty much universal.
Wow. We had another question that came in for you, and it says, many men struggle to talk about fear or vulnerability. How did you create a space safe enough for those truths to emerge?
That's a great question, but I'm not going to take the credit, because I'll tell you what I've learned, which has been a huge surprise to me. So this is a comment at my age, I've been running psychotherapy groups for over 50 years. And I had always done mixed groups, with rare exception. So I remember the night that I stood outside the room and I was getting ready to start my first men's group. And I thought, Avrum, this is the worst idea you've ever had. This is going to be so boring. These guys are not going to do any work. They're not going to open up. They're not going to be vulnerable. They're going to talk about work. They're going to talk about politics. They're going to talk about, well, I'm happy to say I have never in my life been more wrong. And what I've learned, which you'd think I would know since I am a man, but when you get, for instance, I just came back from a conference, and we did we called a men's affinity group, which was just a 2-hour space, no agenda, no plan, just any man who wanted to come was welcome to come and talk about whatever they want to talk about for 2 hours. Well, I'm telling you, within an hour, the depth of disclosure, a group of men who don't know each other, and the depth of openness and vulnerability, and the tissues are flowing. And it's not what you think about men, but what you think about men is men in mixed company. And what you don't know about is men in the company of just other men. So I don't think I think I do bring something to the table. I don't mean to seem like I have no role in it, but mostly I want to emphasize that men are not that different from women in terms of wanting to connect with other people and wanting to be more open and wanting to be more vulnerable. Again, I've been doing groups for 50 years. My groups of men are the only groups I have ever done where people look each other in the eye and talk about how much they care about each other and love each other. In 50 years, only a group with just men.
I think it's really interesting that you do mixed groups, because we need more groups, right? We need those couple groups. I'm not seeing enough of that in today's world, where there's a couple groups. I see division, right? I see men, women in separate groups, but we don't see no connection, no communication, no intimacy. And I want to talk about intimacy with you, Dr. Weiss, because
Sure.
A lot of people think intimacy is just sex, right?
Right. The words get used interchangeably. So people will say to me, oh, we're having a problem with intimacy. I'm like, are you talking about sex? Like, I want to understand what we're talking about.
So can we talk about intimacy, Dr. Weiss? Because there's so many stages of intimacy that people don't understand. They only understand the sex, but they don't understand the connection, right?
Right. And of course, sex can be, hopefully is intimate, but often is not. So they're not the same thing.
So for my listeners out there, what different stages are a part of intimacy that we're not talking about in today's world?
I've never thought about it as having a particular set of stages, but certainly intimacy is something that grows over time with trust. I think that the biggest problem that most couples have today, and this would be more younger couples, is it's shocking to me how little time most young couples spend with each other, particularly if they have children. I raised 2 children, so I'm sympathetic, but when I ask them to sort of walk me through the day, just tell me what a typical day is like for you. They don't have time to talk with each other for 30 seconds. They're both at work. They're rushing to get home. The kids have been in school and then daycare, so the kids are totally fried. And they have maybe if they're lucky, 2 hours to get them fed, bathed, homework, and into bed. Not a light, unstressful situation. Everybody is stressed to the max. And I was listening to someone talk recently, and I don't remember who it was, and one of her principles in education was no homework. And I said, thank God someone's following, because it's ruining families, and there's not a lot of data supporting its efficacy for learning. And so it's just incredibly stressful. And then Saturday comes and the kids have 27 activities and they're running around the car all over the place. So, I'm saying things to couples like, what happens at dinner? And a lot of families, they don't even sit at the table together. They're like, everybody sort of grabs a plate and goes in front of the TV or the computer or whatever. So I try to start with just like, how in the world do you think, like if you had a friend that you talk to once a year, how close do you think you're going to be? So I try to start with couples with like, let's at least create some space where intimacy might happen. Where you like, please turn off the television when you eat. Please sit at the table and look at each other. Try doing something at dinner like a lot of families like to do. Say one good thing and one bad thing that happened. Doesn't matter what you do, but talk.
I think that's the thing that's lacking in today's world, right? We talk a lot with our fingers and texting, but we don't talk a lot face to face. That open communication. Even doing these virtual interviews, it's the connection, right? Taking the time to understand and really listen to what the other person is saying. I feel that that's lacking in today's world.
I'm not critical of people about that. It's not that I think they're lazy or they're not trying hard enough. I think it's just, I'm subject to the same things that everyone else is. I'm sitting, I told you I was on the ferry coming home, and it's, it's supposed to be an hour and it's going into an hour and a half. And what do? I pull up my phone, of course. There's people sitting all around me. I could sit and chat with anybody, but I'm not reading anything. I'm looking at Instagram. There's nothing there. So, we all have these sort of seductive technology sitting in our pockets all the time. And it requires a concerted effort to put that stuff away and just talk to each other.
Absolutely. So Dr. Weiss, when you did your research on men's fear of women, what fears did you see come to the table?
Well, in the book, I lay out a series of 7 fears. I don't think we need to go through all of them, but the basic point that I want to get across is that it starts from fears that people would recognize, that are more conscious, and it moves progressively through to fears that are not so much recognized and are more unconscious. So one of the fears that most people would recognize is men are afraid of being controlled by women. And the way you know that's true is how much men insist they're not being controlled by women. As Shakespeare said, the lady doth protest too much, methinks. So my original title for the book, which the publisher wisely rejected, is I wanted to call the book Pussy Whip.
Oh,
it's fascinating to me that the worst insult one man can say to another is that he's controlled by a woman. Or if you think about it and go a level deeper, it's really what that says is you're controlled by your need of a woman. So the message in that insult is don't let women run your life. And the way you don't let women run your life is by not needing women, by being self-reliant, self-sufficient, and not needing anyone really, but particularly not women. And then as we move, go ahead.
No, go ahead. There was a glitch in my...
As we move down the scale, you get to things like men are afraid of women's emotions. And again, this is something that is very misunderstood. So it's very typical in heterosexual couples in an argument for a woman to get more and more emotional as the argument goes on and the man to get more and more controlled. And the more emotional she gets, the more controlled he gets, and says really stupid things like, just be rational. Why are you so emotional? Just talk to me, those kinds of things, which are infuriating to women and completely understandably. But what's generally misunderstood about that is it's easy for women to think that men are doing that to control them. But I think what women don't understand is what men are trying to control is themselves. Here's what I mean by that. Emotions are contagious. If you're around somebody who's feeling very anxious, you start to feel anxious. If you're around somebody who feels very sad, you might have a tear come to your eye. So men don't feel as comfortable. They're not as socialized and taught to manage their own emotional life. So when women start getting emotional, they start getting uncomfortable. They start feeling like I'm having more feelings than I know what to do with. And I don't know how to manage my own emotional life. So the only thing I know to do is to shut you up, is to try to tone it down in you so that I feel less emotionally flooded.
Well, it's kind of that tug of war, right?
Yeah. And it's a relatively, when I say to couples is, couples are sort of like, well, we don't know what to do about that. I'm like, yes, you do. You already do. It's a question of pacing. And I know you know about this. If you have sex, you know about this, because you had to figure out, to have a sexual relationship, you had to learn about your timing and your pacing, right? Because you each have different rates of arousal. You have different speeds at which, what things you like, things you don't like, and when you're ready and not. It's the same in emotional conversations. It's being attentive not only to you, but to what your partner's state of arousal is. Like, another thing that shocks me is how many times in conflict couples don't even look at each other. So it would be like giving a lecture and not looking at the people you're talking to. Like, you could be way off base and you've lost the whole audience and you don't know because you're not looking at them. Couples do that a lot. They're sort of talking at each other instead of having a mutual conversation back and forth.
Wow. And that makes a lot of sense. As I'm sitting here, when you go into a lecture or a summit or event, right? And you're just twiddling your thumbs and you don't really like, the speaker's not getting your attention, right? So you're kind of disassociating from the whole topic altogether.
Probably because the speaker's not talking with you. Probably because the speaker is just reading from his or her notes and not engaging with you. So I do workshops online for sometimes hundreds of people, and I manage to find a way to engage people in the audience, even online and even with hundreds of people, because that's how learning happens.
Yeah. Right. You got to make it fun. You can't just come there and just talk like da 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 da. Nobody's going to listen, right? They're going to tune out.
Yeah. It's not just fun. You have to find a way to help people relate to what you're saying. You have to make it come alive so that they can recognize what you're talking about in your own life.
Dr. Weiss, what is one of the biggest misconceptions about men's emotional lives?
I think it's what we were talking about a little earlier, which is that I think I'm aware that this may come across as critical. I think that women are often sort of taught to think of men as sort of emotional cripples. They don't know any better. They can't do it. They're not really interested in intimacy. They don't have the same emotional depth that I do. And I don't think that's true at all. I think men are socialized to pay less attention to their emotions and to do less work to develop their emotional life. But I think men have just as strong an interest in emotions and just as much capacity. I think they're just going to be a little behind. Marriages go one of two ways. Yeah. Well, let me make it a longer answer. When we're kids, boys and girls all play together. And girls have very close relationships with girls and boys have relationships with other boys that are just as close as the girls' relationship. But then there's a tragedy that happens in most boys' lives. Somewhere around grade school, dad gets more involved in the picture. And dad offers their sons a terrible choice. And they say, well, you can be a man like me and have power and influence in the world. But in order to do that, you have to give up anything about you that we associate with femininity, which means in this culture, you have to give up closeness, intimacy, friendship, vulnerability, tenderness. And so boys are given this incredible forced choice between power and intimacy. And if they identify with their dads as being the same sex as them, then they leave behind all of those things I just mentioned. So then when they get to puberty and they get interested in romantic relationships, girls have been practicing relationship skills the whole time. What games did you play when you were a little girl?
I was not really, I was in the corner. I was writing. I wrote a lot as a little girl.
Okay. A lot of girls play games in which they practice relationships. They play school, they play house, they play doctor. All those are games in which they're working on their relationship skills. So when men and women get together, it's usually not a level playing field. Women are usually more skilled emotionally, interpersonally, and more comfortable with the strong emotions in an intimate relationship. Then there's a critical fork in the road, and marriages go one way or two, one of two ways at that point. Men who are more securely attached look at their partner or the person they're dating and they say, wow, she knows a lot about relationships that I don't know. This is great. There's a lot here for me to learn. And if I pay attention and I let myself learn, I could really learn a lot more about being closer with people, which would be great. That's A. B is men who are less secure and who feel threatened by the difference in skills and lock in and get defensive and say, you're not the boss of me. You can't make me do this. You can't make me do that. And then that becomes a power struggle. And then intimacy, rather than a point of connection, becomes a power struggle. And that's where a lot of marriages end up.
What's that tug of war, right? If everybody's tug of warring all the time, what are we actually accomplishing, right? We're just going one side to the other side. You know, we're not accomplishing anything. We're not connecting at all.
Yeah, and it's terribly sad, because I think those men who are locked in that power struggle, really the men and the women want the same thing. The men are just too scared to admit they want it.
Well, how can women or wives or girlfriends help their spouses to open up and share a little bit more?
It's a great question. The research says that you can predict from the first 3 minutes of any argument how the argument's going to go. And it has a lot to do with how quickly things ramp up. Women tend to have a faster pace emotionally than men do, kind of the opposite of sexual relationships. And so women tend to get more emotional more quickly, and they're not paying attention to whether or not their partner is with them. So the Gottman group, who did this research, have a thing they recommend called the slow startup. And if the partner who tends to move a little faster is willing to slow down and sort of match her pace to her partner's pace, that's something women can do that's incredibly helpful.
I've never heard of the slow startup.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, it's like not going 0 to 60. It's being connected to the person you're talking with while you're talking with them. So if you start to deepen and get into, let's say that you got bills due and you're on the money, and the woman starts to talk about how scared she is, but the man's getting more withdrawn and harder and tightened down. So if she sees that her pace is leading to him to withdraw, then she can slow down and make some more room for him to catch up emotionally, saying to him, well, how are you feeling about our financial situation? Until they're both sort of at the same place, and then they can move forward.
Dr. Weiss, in your workshops, do you give couples exercises to try to get closer, to connect, to communicate, to just have that flow of even eye contact? Because we mentioned that earlier, right? We don't even look at each other. And eye contact is also part of intimacy.
I think the primary exercise for people is what we talked about earlier, which is to actually create the time. Most couples are not so bad at talking to each other. They're just kind of out of practice and don't leave time in their lives. So my son and his family, they just had a third baby. And I was getting ready to schedule a visit with them. And I thought, you know what? How about if I come and take the kids and take them someplace?
Let's take them for ice cream.
And the two of you could have some time without somebody. They have 3 kids, 6 years and under. Would it be helpful if I just took the kids off your hands for a while? Now, I would like to see them too, but I remember what it was like to have young kids and how little time we had for our relationship. And so I think it seems simple, but really creating time, uninterrupted time to just hang out together. I mean, it could be pillow talk, it could be coffee. It doesn't have to be sex, it can be just keeping current with each other. Just what happened for you today? What's going on with you?
Well, kind of go back down memory lane, how you fell in love with each other, right? Because sometimes when we have children, we seem to forget what we actually fell for in the start, right? We have the children, we get the job, we get the home, but then we lose the relationship, we lose the connection, because we're no longer talking about what actually connected us in the first place.
Not to go on a polemic here, but, until, let's say, I don't know, 100, 150 years ago, people worked at home. In an agrarian society, people didn't leave the house to go to work. And so work wasn't something that separated families. Work was something families did together. And when work left the home, fathers left the home. And so now fathers spend, I'm stereotyping here. Obviously, not all fathers leave the home to work. I understand that. But in general, fathers often don't spend a lot of time. When I first had my kids, there was a popular joke. And the joke was, what do you call a dad in the park on a Saturday with his kids? And the punchline was divorced. Because you didn't, as recently as 40 years ago when I had my kids, you didn't see fathers in the park on a weekend with their kids unless they were divorced. Now I'm happy to say, you see fathers and their kids all over the place. Fathers are way more active and involved in parenting than they used to be.
Well, the role has reversed. More women are leaving the home now, and the fathers are staying home. I'm seeing in today's society as well.
Yeah, I think that's still somewhat unusual, but it's certainly happening more than it used to. I remember working with men who were stay-at-home dads who were horribly ashamed, and they hated going to social functions because when people said, "What do you do?" they didn't know what to say. When my kids were young, the way I used to answer that question was people say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a father." I had a job, and I knew what they meant. But I was kind of being provocative and saying, well, if you're asking me the most important thing in my life I do, I'm a father.
I like that answer. We need to hear that a lot more. Instead of the titles of work, the titles of your home.
Yeah, I've only written one letter to the editor in my life, and it was my local newspaper wrote a story with the headline was Mr. Mom. And I wrote to the paper and I said, men who take care of their children are not being mothers, they're fathers. They're not Mr. Mom, they're being a dad.
I want to get into some of that because you just mentioned magazines. I found here that you wrote in The Good Man Project and Psychology Today.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about those magazines for my male listeners out there. They might want to know a little bit more about these.
Sure. Psychologytoday.com is an online, it's a print magazine with an online, and they have a variety of topics, anything related to psychology. So I write a lot about men's fears of women. I write about relationships. I write about anything that I'm interested in. So, I've written articles. I wrote an article called There's No Such Thing as Laziness, which I don't think there is. I've written articles about men and anger. I've written articles about couples and sexuality, a whole range of topics. And it's a great outlet because a lot of people, it's a very well-read website. And over the years I've been writing for them, I've had 4 million views. So it's a great outlet to get the word out there.
And that other magazine, The Man's Project, The Good Man Project, what's that
Yeah.
about?
The Good Man Project is, again, a website that publishes content just related to men. That it's not just for men, but it's articles just about men. And they also have a large worldwide audience. Everything I write goes to those two places.
And we have a question that just came in. One word that captures healthy masculinity for you.
That's a good question. First of all, I like I think some people would say there is no such thing as healthy masculinity. They sort of think as masculinity is toxic. So first of all, I like the question. I like that they're saying that there is such a thing as healthy masculinity. I think I would have to say love. I think I would have to say that healthy masculinity is the capacity to give and receive love.
And why do you feel that misconception that people think that there is no masculinity?
Well, it's not that I don't think there's no such thing, but they think that masculinity is inherently toxic. So there's been a lot of bad press lately about masculinity and sort of with the idea that to be masculine is inherently toxic, which of course I disagree with. Men are socialized in a lot of ways that are harmful to men and harmful to other people. But that doesn't mean that being a man is inherently toxic or bad.
And any myths about men you'd love to erase forever, Dr. Weiss?
Well, I think that would probably be the one we talked about earlier, which is the myth that men are not as emotional or not as emotionally interested or not as emotionally capable as women. I'm here to tell you that it's just not true. That's
So how,
absolutely true.
so how do we erase that?
Well, the interesting thing about that is it's like what I told you about that conference. It easier for men to access their emotions in groups with other men as opposed to mixed groups with women. And so what I generally recommend to people is that they find a way of getting engaged in more intimate conversations with other men and sort of learn more about how to be more emotionally open and vulnerable, and then take that into a primary relationship with a woman. But I think for most men, again, this workshop I just did, 5 strangers from, don't know each other at all. And within less than an hour, they're just having these incredibly intimate conversations. So the desire is there. But I think it's one of the chapters in the book that I really like is it's sort of a step-by-step guide for men, how to find a group of other men to talk to about. And what I suggest is start a book club and use this book as the first book in your book club. And I've sometimes have phoned in on Zoom and joined book clubs like this, where they're reading the book. I'm always happy to do that. And I think that's a good starting place for a lot of men.
I think that's cool. A book club for men.
Yeah.
We have book club for women. Let's have a book club for men.
I'm in a book club for men.
What's one book that has stand out and helped you on your journey, Dr. Weiss?
Well, the one I think probably I would say The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller, which is about it's a beautifully written book about narcissistic parenting and how narcissistic parenting tends to beget narcissistic parenting. That if you've been raised by a narcissistic parent, it's very easy to make those same mistakes with your own children.
And you brought up something really important there, the narcissistic parent, right? How does that affect our relationships in the future with women and men? Because I know you're doing some new research as well on how mothers affect their daughters, right?
Yep. It's a very interesting project, and it's difficult to talk about without offense. So what you hear from men more than anything else when they talk about their relationships is the word they use most often is criticized. They most often feel criticized. And it's not always, you can't always see it. Like if you sit with the couple together, he's feeling very criticized, but you can't always really see ways that she's being critical. But he's not crazy. He's picking up on something. So on a whim, once in a workshop, I asked the women in the room, tell me what you learned from your mother about men. What did you learn from her in what she said to you and what she modeled for you by the way she treated your father and other men in your family? And I was pretty shocked to hear the answers. And the answers were not all negative. There were some very positive. My mother taught me to respect men, to revere men, but most of them were pretty negative. Most of them were what women said were, my mother taught me to not trust men, not rely on men, be careful around men, don't let yourself be financially dependent on a man, and don't expect intimacy from a man they're not capable of it. That's what your female friends are for. And so that generation to generation to generation transmission of information from woman to woman to woman shows up in our relationships. And if you listen for it, you can hear the ways in which women are being critical of men. Now, the things they're being critical of men about are all accurate. They're all true. They're all things that have happened. But because it's sort of there hidden in the background, it becomes an obstacle for couples that they don't recognize and that really gets in the way.
So Dr. Weiss, we talked about the mother and the daughter. Let's talk about the father and the son.
Sure.
The role models and the examples. Is that where some of the fear comes from as well?
No, I think for men, it comes more from their experience with their mothers.
Okay.
With dads, it's a whole different cluster. For men, for boys, young men with their fathers, it's more about competition and aggression and measuring up. When people think about, am I good enough? They are more likely to think about their father than their mother. That kind of self-esteem and competition and being better, that's more what tends to play out in relationships between sons and fathers.
Wow. And it makes a lot of sense because I have a son and I have two daughters, and my daughters always say that my son is my favorite. There's no favorite, right? It's just a different type of love towards my son than there is towards my daughters.
Yeah.
Could you explain that to my listeners out there that might not understand that differentiality between parents, like the mothers and sons and mothers and daughters? Why is there a difference?
Well, I think it starts from the beginning. There's a video I recommend to your listeners to take a quick video, a few minutes. If you Google the still face experiment, STILL, you'll see an experiment from, I think, the 60s, where they had mothers and infants interacting with each other. And they did it in a split screen, just like you and I are now, so you can see them both at the same time. And you can see there's a conversation, even though these are infants who can't talk. You can see there's a back and forth. They understand each other. So the baby will make a cute face and the mom will smile. And the baby learns, oh, that worked. Because remember, human infants are completely dependent, unlike any other mammal. Human infants can't even stand up. They can't feed themselves. They get nothing. So having mom's attention is a life and death matter. If you don't have a mom taking care of you, you're going to die. So your number one emotional task as an infant, male or female, is to get mom's attention and to get mom interested in you so that you can survive. Okay? So in this experiment, they had the mom turn away and then turn back with what they called a still face, which means she just kind of sat there with no expression. Not angry, not critical, not mean, just not responsive. So within a minute, the infants fell apart, totally fell apart, started screaming and wailing. And some of them actually lost bowel and bladder control and couldn't sit upright anymore. So mom's attention is everything. So here's where the differences come in. Most of us had female caregivers, and we had that relationship, that urgent, I need you to take care of me relationship with a woman. So if you're a guy and you had that with a woman when you were a baby, then if you're straight and you get into an intimate relationship with women, it recreates those same dynamics. But most of us had a very different relationship with our dads. For a lot of people, their dads don't really get involved until later in life. It's not as emotionally intimate relationship. And so a whole other different cluster. So moms and sons have that relationship built on that early intense connection.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to check out that video. And I love when my guests give me information and my listeners information, because then they got to do their homework. They got to.
Let me just say one thing. Like, I wouldn't watch that video at bedtime. It's I've seen it 100 times. It's disturbing. It's very disturbing to watch these infants just fall apart, and know that all of us had that experience because mom went to the bathroom or took a phone call or got distracted or had the flu or whatever, all of us had those experiences where mom was not available when we wanted her to be. And so we've all had to learn how to cope with that. And that's why what we're talking about today exists, because for men, when they enter into an intimate relationship with a woman, they're as freaked out about her not paying attention, even though it's not a life and death matter. It's so deeply ingrained. So I had a guy tell me once that when he came home at the end of the day, he could tell when he walked in the front door if his wife was upset with him. And what he meant was, before he saw her, he absolutely believed that he could just feel in the air, because he was so focused on whether or not he was okay with her, that was the first thing he thought about when he came home. I was like, oh, is she mad at me? Are we okay?
Was it a bad day? Was it a good day?
Yeah.
I get that from my spouse.
Yeah.
Where if he comes in and he can sense my energy and he's like, ooh,
yeah.
I'm not sure if I want to talk to her right now.
Now. It's like,
I'll just go into the other side.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Weiss, in the 50 years that you've done your workshops and speaking in that, what is one thing that has stood out to you the most?
Well, it'd be hard to narrow it down to one. I think the way I want to answer that question is I have really changed the way I work with couples pretty dramatically. I think when I was younger, I thought the way to help couples was to help them resolve conflict, sort of like mediate and work out like, okay, well, you don't like this, but you like that. And well, you want to go to the beach and you want to go to the mountains. That way. I don't do that at all anymore. I don't think that's what's helpful for couples. When I work with couples now, I'm looking for the love. I ask them about how they came together, what attracted them to each other, times that they felt the most close with each other. So I think of it more if you've ever lit a fire, and it starts to go out and there's just a few coals left, it's almost out, but there's a few coals and you have to fan the coals. Just if you just blow too hard, it goes out. That's my job. My job is like just fanning the coals, trying to get a little flame, trying to capture. So what I'm looking for in session is I'm looking for a connection. I'm looking for them to remember, as you said earlier, what it is that makes them care about each other. Because marriage is hard. And frankly, it's often a pain in the butt. And the only reason we put up with it is those moments of connection and love. And if you've lost track of that, it starts to seem like not worth it. And for it to be worth it, you have to reconnect with those moments of love.
We just had a question that just came in for you. And it's, if you could reshape how we teach boys about love and emotion, where would you begin?
Reteach boys, you said?
Yeah.
That was the question. I would be very conscious about not teaching them traditional masculinity. And that is a very hard thing to do. There's a wonderful author. Her name is Judy Chu. She's a U.S. Congresswoman and a psychologist who wrote a book called When Boys Become Boys. And she spent 2 or 3 years in a pre-K kindergarten class hanging out with the boys, trying to learn when does traditional masculine socialization happen. And this was a setting in which nobody wanted to socialize these boys into traditional masculinity. They didn't want them to think that they had to be tough. They didn't want them to think they couldn't cry. They didn't want them to think they could. So they really made, both the families and the school made a concerted effort to not socialize the boys in that way. And behind the teacher's back, the boys created the We Hate Girls Club. So it's so difficult to do because kids are plugged into social media and TV and movies where these messages about traditional masculinity and not to be emotional and not to be vulnerable and not to be tender. So the message what I would change would be to try to change the messages that we give. Like I have 2 twin 6-year-old grandchildren, boys, and they have a big dress up area in the house. And they have, traditionally masculine costumes and traditionally feminine costumes. And sometimes they put on a dress and sometimes they put on a fireman's outfit. So they're not being told this is okay and this isn't. They're being told wear whatever you want to wear.
Right.
The problem is that they're going to go out in the world where if he goes to school in a dress, he's going to be made fun of by the other boys.
And that book is called what again?
It's called When Boys Become Boys.
When Boys Become
Judy
Boys.
Chu, CHU.
What reaction from readers or clients has surprised you the most about your books?
I think the reaction of women has been the most gratifying. That I didn't know whether women would accept the book or be interested in the book, and the way women have taken to the book and how much women have gotten out of the book has really been very gratifying, because I didn't know. I'm not a woman, and so I don't really understand the inner world of women the way I understand. I had 2 children. I had a boy and a girl. The boy was easy. I understood what he was going through. I know it was like the girl. I kept having to ask my wife, what's this? I kept needing explanations, and I was interested to learn, but I didn't know it. I didn't know how the book would be received by women. And, I've had some arguments with people, I was at a party with some of my closest friends once, and I was reading this literature that in fact women initiate physical violence in heterosexual relationships more often than men do.
Oh,
There are over 200 studies. And now when men initiate violence, it's more serious and you're more likely to end up in a hospital, but women more frequently initiate violence. So I was just fascinated by this. And like an idiot, I brought it up at a party. It happened to be all women at the party. And I got
that was the time to run.
that was not the smartest move. But these are my closest friends. And one of my dearest friends finally just looked at me and said, well, that's just not true. I'm like, what do you mean it's not true? These are studies based on self-report. This is what women said. No, that can't be right. So just that kind of, like I'm wanting to be curious and sort of understand this. And sometimes people are just like, no, that's wrong.
And what larger message about compassion and connection do you hope to audience carry away from your work?
Well, I really believe that that we are tribal creatures. And I think that our happiness and our health depend in large part on our ability to connect with other people. There's a lot of research in the last few decades about loneliness. In fact, the article that I've written that got the most views, I wrote an article about men and loneliness, which had 1 million views. And so we're starting to learn how dangerous loneliness is. So, for example, loneliness contributes more to early mortality than smoking cigarettes.
Wow.
Never would imagine that, would you? So when your doctor has your annual physical and he says, are you smoking cigarettes? How much alcohol do you drink? Are you exercising? The doctor should also be asking you, do you have friends? Do you spend time with your friends? Do you talk with friends when things are bothering you? Because it's actually as important for your health as any of those other things.
Wow.
And there are a lot of horribly lonely people in the world.
We don't talk about loneliness. That's one topic that doesn't come to the table. We kind of avoid it, right? Anything that makes us uncomfortable, we avoid.
Well, and it gets worse as you get older. We have a group of neighbors. In fact, Thursday night is pizza night in my neighborhood. We have a group of neighbors who get together. I'll be going there soon. And one of them is 98 years old. Wow. She's just the sweetest, sharp as a tack. What an interesting woman. Well, there are some weeks when pizza night's the only night that she has any contact with anybody. She can't drive anymore. In the winter, she can't really walk because of the ice and the snow. And so she's largely stuck in her home by herself. So we're delighted to see her once a week, but that's a lot of the rest of the week's a long time between Thursday nights. I'm going to see her tonight and I'm going to tell her I talked about her in this podcast. She'll get a kick out of that.
Well, that's good. I always like when people can talk about tea time, right? Because a lot of my guests, they come on and they're like, where are we going with this tea? And your tea that you gave me, and I want to bring it back, is Men Fear of Women, is what you gave me for your tea. Yeah. So what perspective has changed about women for you and your fear of women?
Well, I'm happy to say that I am married to a wonderful woman whom I'm not afraid of. Occasionally, still, but really has really helped me not be afraid. And it's wonderful because, fear erodes intimacy. And as long as you're afraid, it's really hard to be close. And if you can get less scared, that opens the door to connecting and being closer.
And we talked about men talk and men's book clubs and that. What other things can men do to connect and share that moment, have that safe space?
A lot of people have written about it, and I think there's some truth to this, is that men are often more comfortable connecting around activities. Oh. So like hiking or whatever, playing cards or going to a game or whatever. And I think women have been unfairly critical of that. So there's a lot of, there's memes on Instagram about, the guy comes home and he says, so the guy goes to visit the friend of theirs from a couple. And let's say his wife is very sick. So the wife says, the wife of the friend is very sick. The wife says, so how's Tommy's wife? Well, I don't know. We didn't talk about that. You spent 2 hours with him. You didn't ask how his wife is. No, we were talking about it. So women tend to be critical of how men do closeness, but I would like to suggest that it's different, not less than. That men often feel comfortable and can connect quite intimately while engaged in an activity. And I don't think we need to put that down or think of it as less than.
Well, and I'm seeing a lot of men are starting to open up, right? Because they grew up being told, don't talk, be the big boy, don't cry. But I'm starting to see a lot of men changing by sharing their stories, and like having guests like you on my platform as well helps.
Yeah. I'll tell you when I first thought the world might be changing. My son, my firstborn, was probably less than a year old. And we walked into a McDonald's because, they love McDonald's. And, or maybe he's a little more than a year old. It was still in diapers. That's the point of the story. And I walked into McDonald's and I saw a changing table in McDonald's and I burst into tears because I had been changing his diaper in fast food restaurants and other restaurants, and I'd never once seen a change. So I'm having to change his diaper in these nasty bathroom sinks because nobody ever thought that a man would need a place to change a diaper. And when I saw the changing table at McDonald's, I literally burst into when I found the manager. And I said, thank you so much. It was crazy. But I'm like, you don't understand how important it is to have a change, because if we don't expect men to be parents, things are never going to get better. It's when men, there's a wonderful old feminist book from the 70s called, of course, Mary Pfeiffer is the author. I'll think of it. But she says basically the only way we're going to change the patriarchy is men being dads, men being as involved in parents. And when I go and visit my son and his family now, so we, often there's a gathering, gets together with, they all have kids, they're all that age. I'm happy to tell you that when a kid gets hurt or cries or fights with other kids, it's the dads who get up. The moms just sit there drinking their wine, looking at each other, just like men used to do, ignore the kids, which is great. And the dads get up. I would say 9 times out of 10, it's the dads who get up. And I'm like,
way to go, man. You did it.
What I tell young fathers, which often irritates them, but it's true. If you have a child, you should be the one to get up in the middle of the night with the kid, because it's the only unsupervised experience you're going to have as a parent. If your wife is awake, she will be watching you and supervising your parenting. But in the middle of the night, it's just the two of you. It's the most intimate time you can lose some sleep, but so what? It's the most intimate time that you will have with your child.
I think that's a cool message. I want to wrap it up with final words for all my listeners out there, and where they can get the book, how they can reach you. And for my audio listeners, if you could just spell out your website. I have it across the screen here. But
Sure.
The people that are just listening to the audio, if you could spell it out for them.
Sure. You can get everything. You can reach me, and you can buy the book on the website. You can buy it on Amazon too. The website is Avrum Weiss PhD.com, AVRUMWEISS PhD.com. I will say also a pet peeve of mine. I return every email within 24 hours. If you email me and you don't hear back from me, I either died or I didn't get your email. But you're stuck on the ferry. But then you'll still hear from me. So if you email me with a question or something you want to talk about, you don't hear back, just email again, because I will answer.
And final message you'd like to leave with all the guys?
Find other guys to talk to. You don't have to be so alone. A lot of men think that other men are not interested in talking, but I don't think that's true. In my experience, men are interested in talking. And so reach out to some guys who you think might be interested in talking. Maybe read the book together, start a book group or something like that, or just invite them to go out for a beer and chat. But reach out to other men.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it this time, and I appreciate that you're still standing and that it was just the ferry's fault. And yes. I want to thank all of my listeners out there. We're just going to do a closing summary, and we're going to wrap up this tea time, and Miss Liz will be back at 7 p.m. with a surprise tea time that has stepped in to replace one of the guests that is going to be coming in December. We just had a little mix-up, a little hiccup in calendar booking. So As we close today's tea time with Dr. Avrum Weiss, we've reminded that love often hides behind fear and fear behind silence. Through awareness and honest conversation, we can begin to bridge the emotional gaps that separate us. Dr. Weiss has shown us that true healing begins not in the perfection, but in the understanding, in the courage to listen, to feel, and to connect without defense. So, as we step away from today's tea time, may you carry this with you: compassion in the bridge between hearts and courage in the first step towards connection. Until next time, keep your cups open to truth, to love, and to growth. One story, one seed, and one conversation at a time. And I'll see you guys at 7 p.m. with the second tea time.
You do 2 in a day?